right now. We're losing like 100,000 jobs a month to AI in this early talent space. We see parents who are now showing up at job interviews with their child.
Career development is about self-discovery. Welcome to Push Yourself Podcast, and this is where we step away from job titles, descriptions to explore the real stories behind the work, the pivots, the mentors, and internal battles, and also the quiet realizations that shape who we become. My guest today is Rebekah Paré, a higher ed leader who's helping bridge the space between academic ideals and the realities of the working world. But beyond that, she's someone whose own path from music to career leadership carries lessons about resilience, curiosity, and redefining what success looks like. Rebekah, thank you for being here.
I'm thrilled to be with you today, Artem. Thank you.
But before we jump in, I want to start with something simple. If you couldn't use the words career services, higher education, or students, how would you describe what you do?
So I can't use the words higher education, students, or peer services.
Correct.
I would say that I help universities support their undergraduate and graduate strategies for student success. Oh, I use the word student, but
That's okay.
outcome.
That's okay.
Yeah. Successful
It's
outcomes.
successful outcomes. Okay, I like that. It's kind of
It's tricky.
It is tricky, and I know I like this question because I don't like labels. I always think of conversations when we have people, when we're at an event or we meet someone, and we tend to ask, "Oh, so what do you do?" And it turns into this transaction of titles. And yes, we understand the titles, what it means. Like for work, I'm a program manager. But what exactly is that, and how does it connect? For our purposes to what we do beyond our career paths, our life paths, because I think both are intertwined. So that's why I like this question, because it forces you, I guess, at time to think beyond the labels. In terms of what you're doing right now, but reflecting back into the past, was there a specific moment that everything kind of clicked for you, that you realized that what you're trying to do for work isn't just a title, isn't just a role, but something that you're meant to do?
I don't know if there was a particular moment in my experience. I do remember spending quite a bit of time with college students, undergraduate college students, while I was working as an academic advisor and program manager for what was called the International Studies major, sort of an interdisciplinary academic program. And because we're an interdisciplinary program, we didn't have other faculty for students to work with. The faculty were also all in other departments. So it was really kind of the face of the department. And so I spent a lot of time with students. Any questions about the program had to come to me. And students it just became so clear to me, I'm really worried about what their futures would look like. What does it take to get a job? How do they leverage their majors, their academic experience, their co-curricular experience into something beyond graduation? And there's a lot of anxiety and worry. I also experienced a lot of misunderstandings and myths, right? So I would hear phrases like, I need an international studies major so that I can get a job. If it says international on my transcript, right, that makes me employable. Not really, so we kind of have to back the students up to think about what that was, right? And so I'd hear those kinds of concerns, some panic, some poor decision-making because of that panic, and really trying to figure out what it is that they wanted to do. And I remember feeling a deep sense of empathy from my own experience. And also just because you just sort of wanted to put your arms around the students and just kind of calm them a little bit. But I feel like at that time, I really just wanted to help them. I felt like I was doing good work. I felt like they were really resonating with the things that I had to say. I was doing a lot of myth busting, and I've just felt like it was the right thing to be doing, and so I always spent the time having those conversations with students. I'd prioritize those conversations with students, and I think that is really kind of what kicked my work off, my career off into this pattern, that I've kind of followed, which is some kind of career services related efforts. Really trying to think about how do we go back to the basics with our students, ensure that they have what it is that they need, have the tools, the resources, the information at the right time, at the right place, so that we can really ensure that they are successful after graduation. They're doing amazing things, they deserve it. So, I would say that was probably that period of time in my life, when that really struck me as being such an important work.
Now, if I understand you correctly, sounds like you weren't intending to do necessarily student-centered work, or more specifically, working hands-on with students. Did I understand you correctly? But now you kind of fell into it, or am I
No,
misunderstood you completely?
no, I mean, I had intended, I mean, I had taken on this role to work with students. What I hadn't envisioned was that it would focus in on their professional development in the ways that it did. I was doing a lot of academic advising support. I had a very strong academic background, advanced degrees, had teaching. Um, and so I was really focused on that space, right? I was not a student who left college and went on to get a job, like most students do. I went and right back into academia. And so I followed in many ways a faculty track. And so the whole career space wasn't even all that familiar to me. And that I ended up spending a lot of time learning about it, helping students negotiate it, plan for it, was not, I think, in my worldview.
Are there any examples of students, the specific prevalent myth that you found, maybe time after time, hearing from students that you realize, oh, there's work that needs to be done in this specific area?
Yeah. I think one myth that I heard a lot was that the academic major determined your career. And and I think there's some majors where I think that's absolutely true, right? If you're going into nursing, you're probably going to become a nurse, right? But for a lot of interdisciplinary programs like the one I was in, for most of our liberal arts and sciences majors, that is not at all the case. Just because you study physics doesn't make you a physicist, right? Or doesn't make you a science teacher. And so I spent a lot of time helping students understand that what they were doing was providing them a set of really robust sets of skills and competencies that would enable them to go on to do a great many possible things. Then the question becomes, how do you figure that? How do you sort that out? Because that feels like for an 18, 19, 20 year old, a huge black hole, perhaps, right? That there's all these opportunities and there are no opportunities at the same time, right? How do I figure out what that path is and how do I walk that path? The other thing, and my first example maybe is a good indicator of that, which is that students would assume that by accruing more majors or credentials, that always led to that meant employability, and that isn't always the case, either. So I spent a lot of time helping students think about how do you leverage your academic credentials, your academic experiences, your majors to produce something that's interesting, interesting combinations, not repetitive combinations. So, finding different ways in which that you're kind of stacking skills and experiences through complementary programs, not overlapping programs, is what I guess I'm trying to get at. So, we see a lot of students who are really after what I call like sort of merit badge syndromes, merit badge. Like the more majors, the more employable. And that was just really not the case, right? We really wanted students to get more experience and help them think about the experiences they were getting in college. And I'll tell you, students are getting amazing experiences in college, and they just don't realize that's what is really differentiating about them. That's where they're applying these skills that they're learning in their academic majors. So that's another myth, right? Really trying to help them get their arm around why that's valuable and how that can really make a difference for them. And then I would say another one was just about, liberal arts being unemployable, right? An English major is unemployable. I had a parent come to me with her daughter at a parents' weekend, and she like literally kind of pushed her daughter in front of me and said she wants to be an English major. And I thought, what? Yeah, great. That's a great major. Here are all the things you can do with an English major. And I had the data there to prove it. And her mom's face dropped, right? Like, oh, like, yeah, this is a great opportunity. There's so much you can do with this. And these are the most important skills in any career, communication skills. And the student's going to walk away with fantastic communication skills, right? So this idea is that there are certain majors that are just not employable, and that's just not remotely true. Employers actually aren't looking at your majors most of the time anyway. Again, maybe not if you're going to become a nurse, right? You need to have that nursing degree. There's certain paths where that is absolutely essential, very vocationally tracked paths. But for the most part, that's not the case. They're looking at the whole picture of your academics and your experiences, your interest in this company, what you're hoping to accomplish there, right? That is a bigger, rounder, more holistic way of looking at candidates. And anyway, we like to simplify things into some assumptions. And so we're dealing with those student assumptions, parent assumptions. And so I feel like a whole lot of my career was about sparking students' imaginations for what's possible, right? Removing those limitations, removing those barriers. Let's figure out how to get to where it is that you want to go. And it may be hard. It may be a lot of work. And it might also be the most natural next thing for you.
Now, you mentioned just a moment ago the parents, their narratives, the student narratives, who they want to become. There's a narrative of a parent. You can have a very hands-on parent who practically guides the student. My son is 13. If I'm correct, you are a parent to two kids. Is that
I
correct?
Right,
Yes.
yeah.
How do you reconcile? What are your thoughts on parents who try to drive the narrative for their kids? Kind of, I would say, live vicariously through them.
Oh, yeah. I think I'm a daughter of one of those parents. And I try really hard not to do that with my daughter. I have a 20-year-old who's in college. She's a junior. And I have an 8-year-old son. And so very different experiences for me as a parent and how I'm parenting. And also just like the world is so different between these two kids. It's really remarkable. But I think as parents, like we really, really want the best for our students. We really want to help. The challenge is, how do we help? And what our experience was, what my experience was going to college, getting a job eventually, is not the same experience that students have today, right? We have a really challenging labor market. We have AI, big tech disruption right now, where we're losing, according to Burning Glass Institute, like 100,000 jobs a month to AI in this early talent, new graduate space. So there's a lot of anxiety. I mean, I actually even talked to my mom, and she's very, very concerned about this for my daughter, for others, right? There's a lot of change afoot right now. And so we're seeing, I think, just more and more concerns. And I think we're also dealing with a student population now that leans and is closer to their parents than maybe prior generations, where they were maybe more independent, more autonomous than they are today. So we see students really relying on parents for information, and parents really wanting to say the right things and do the right things. And sometimes that is perfect, because when we can, especially in higher education, when we can leverage parents and families to support and provide connection to like meaningful, relevant, timely resources, like that can be the game changer for students to take that step when they're feeling a little bit uncertain or lost, right? To have that place where they can confide in those things, and a parent to be able to say, well, here's, you need to go talk to your advisor, right? You need to go see the career center. Sometimes just that is the catalyst students need. But things are becoming more challenging. And so now I think parents are feeling a lot more worry and a lot more concern. So I have talked to parents who, have questioned my institution's relationship with certain companies because their students didn't get an internship there. you know so then they're blaming the institution for that, when in this particular situation the student wasn't really experienced enough to have that, to be successful at that internship. um, applying for internships that are kind of above, above them.
Right.
Um, we see parents who are now showing up at job interviews with their child. We're seeing parents call employers and advocate for them over the phone as if they're giving an unsolicited reference.
I've seen
And
I've seen those articles recently a few days
yeah,
ago on LinkedIn, and I guess I should be glad to say working in talent acquisition manager in the past, I haven't experienced that, but seeing it, I have to believe it, and that sounds like very strange. Just you mentioned previous generations weren't so reliant on parents. Like
yeah,
consider myself a first generation college student. My parents went through education in Soviet USSR, and I was kind of more or less guiding myself. I wish I had more involvement, but now I also sometimes feel, well, maybe I'm lucky I don't have too much involvement. I haven't had too much involvement. But I want to go slightly back. But what was your experience like in terms of your early career aspirations? And that would encompass, let's say, high school, college, and the realities of the world, how actually things turned out to be. Because I'm sure this probably paints or has a certain effect on how you look at your work right now, what you're trying to do.
it does. And well, I had a very I'm not even sure I can sum it up in a word or two. I had parents who were very concerned, right? And not concerned. So I'll start by saying that my mom, I was raised by a single parent. I'm also a first gen college student, came from a really limited income background. Um, and my mom was really pushing going to graduate school, really pushing education. That for her was sort of the epitome of success, right? And my father, my father my parents were divorced. My father was just like, do whatever you want to do. Like, follow your passions. You will find your way. I have confidence in you. And my mother was just like, you've all this potential, push, push, push. And she remarried, and she remarried my stepfather, who is uh was a contract he owned multiple businesses, was a contractor, didn't go to college, very successful businessman. And very different perspective on education. So my mother's pushing to continue in academia and to go to graduate school to get a PhD was suddenly contrasted by this. What do you think you're doing with your life? Right? You want to major in what? Music and German? You're not going to, that you're just not going to be successful. You're not going to have enough money. You're not going to have, she was kind of like the realist, the kind of trying to balance, I think, my mom's perspective. He had a very harsh way about him. I think even just the nature of his business is very heavy-handed management, and so that kind of led him to try to figure out ways in which to support my career development from his standpoint. This is a really great example, perhaps, of what we were talking about before, which parents is getting involved in, maybe not being the most productive in that involvement. But I remember him pulling me onto a construction site, and there's a man on the floor. Um, Nailing boards. He's creating the flooring and he's nailing boards. And he grabbed him and he was like, "Hey, I need you to talk to her." And he kind of stood up and kind of looked at me like, "What is going on?" And my stepfather said, what are you doing?" And he's like, "Well, I work, I do flooring, carpeting." He said, "Okay, what did you do before?" He said, "I was a teacher." And he said, "So why are you doing this now?" And he said, "To make more money." My father looked at me and was like, "See?" And then we were out of there. I was mortified. This guy was more, I think, kind of embarrassed. It was very awkward. And so, he would do that. He took my he had his own, he had three children. My mom had two. So he took just the girls, two of us, to Key West for a vacation. And um we spent a lot of time driving around big mansions with big yachts outside. So a lot of time. And I'm thinking, what is going on? What are we doing? Like, this is not exactly how I imagined my time in Key West, right? And so he said, girls, I want you to know that I invited you on this trip. I did not invite your brothers. I'm like, okay, you still don't understand why. This feels really weird, but whatever. Maybe or financial decisions at play. Like, I'm not going to judge. And they said, well, we invited you because we wanted to show you your potential. And underneath that was that we don't think your brothers have potential, which is laughable because they're all very successful in their own spaces. His idea was, there are these big mansions. You have the potential to like own one of these mansions. And I remember sitting in the backseat of the car thinking, I don't want to clean this house. I'll never own a house this big because I don't want to clean it. Never occurred to me, of course, that you have enough money that people clean your house. Like that was not in my worldview. So I cleaned our house at home. So it was like, this
I,
doesn't seem desirable to me by a long shot.
it's very funny that you say this. Like, I like road trips. I've been to Key West, and I realize what you're referring to. But also, if you go outside, if you travel anywhere and go through the more rural areas, I guess, with houses and lavish mansions. But you mentioned cleaning and I my view evolved. I guess probably earlier on when I was younger. Of course, you think about money, you doing what you love, but also getting a lot of money so you can buy a house. But later on, I guess I want to say maybe it's a sign of maturity. You start thinking about cleaning the house, about keeping up the property, and
Yeah.
and like how you have to work not just to own a house, but you have to have that overhead to clean it, to upkeep it. And but to me, the natural next question is, how much time are you actually spending inside the house? You have to earn so much money to be able to afford it and not continuously work in order to enjoy it. And to me, I hate to sound high and mighty. This is not what I'm trying to say, but like the thought process is some people want to have that aim. The goal is the money.
Yeah.
And I'm not here to judge that. I understand. But some people really want to enjoy the work that they do. Maybe like that, we call it the calling. And I'm wondering, is there maybe a middle ground between the two? But there has to be a realization. If you want the money, you will have to probably, very likely, trade off some of that enjoyment of it if you can have that status symbol. So yes, I think we're venturing into the ground of philosophical thought. I don't profess to advocate for one or the other. It's just whatever you ultimately decide what to do. But also just going back to the career-oriented work, that period of time, let's say in college, not in high school counselors, but say college career offices. To me, at times it seems that it's not enough time to make an informed decision, or so much work has to be done within that short time frame, 4 years or so, when students are at the young stage just trying to discover what exactly do they really want to do. And I would assume they maybe haven't realized it, haven't flashed it out for themselves. Do I want to pursue the money, or do I want to pursue the calling, or something in between? And what does that actually entails? What has been your experience in these kind of
Yeah.
situations?
I mean, I think what you're leaning in on is a set of values, right? My stepfather's values really centered, one of his values centered around money and freedom and control, right? He didn't have to work for anybody. He could control his destiny through, earning money. And he set himself very ambitious goals. I mean, this is a guy who grew up um, shining shoes and running newspapers as a little boy because his parents didn't have enough money to put food on the table. So we're talking about, 6, 7-year-old kid raising money for the family. So, his experience and his desire to change his own circumstance and future. He's been incredibly successful at doing it. He's been laser focused on it. Like I have to honor that. But it also showed me that there's more to life than just that. And so how do you strike that balance, right? He's now retired. He and my mom have a wonderful life, a wonderful set of friends. They get to do kind of the things that they want to do because they did set themselves up financially, right? And that was what he was after. He wanted to be in this place, and he's there. And that's a wonderful thing. Um, I don't envision us like, I don't even envision a time in my life where I'm not working anymore. I enjoy working. It's part of my identity. I think earning money is important. I've changed my tune a little bit on that myself because, especially once you have children, they cost some money. You need a new car, and then you need a new air conditioner or whatever it is that's at play, right? The money kind of does um, can help bring the comforts that people want, right? And so understanding what those values are, I think, is a critical component. When we think about students and their career development, I would say values is part of the starting point when we think about supporting students' career development. So the first stage is answering the question, who am I? And even if, when we think about this as an 18-year-old, who am I? What that looked like for me at 18 and what that looks for me like for now will be different, right? So it's not that we're setting ourselves up to lock in a set of values or understanding about ourselves that will not evolve. It's starting with the skills of how do we reflect on what it is that we want and need, right? What are the things that excite me and interest me? Do I like living in the city? Do I want to live out in the country? Those are important things, right? I have a good friend of mine who went into a career path where really the only place to get jobs was in New York City. And she just did not like living in New York City. And so there's the conflict, right? She couldn't do the work that she wanted to do. So that was suddenly that work was not available to her. So understanding that before you go in to commit to degrees and trainings and all the other things is really important. So I think that that is something that we could be doing better from that K through 12 time period, right? Where we're supporting elementary and secondary education, helping students reflect on like learning their own self-assessment skills, learning on who they are, what they value. I think those are really important things that students need to be able to take with them as they go through life because career development we think is iterative. The more you learn about yourself, the more that changes your trajectory and what it is that you're interested in, the more experiences that you have may say, oh, that didn't go quite as what I thought. I don't really like this work as much as I might be good at it, but I don't like it. So that's going to make you come back to that self-assessment. Well, let me think about why that is. Okay, so now I understand that I can move forward again and try a different path. And we are constantly iterating on who we are and where we're trying to go and where we're going to take ourselves. And I think that is such an important part of the process. And to your point about the amount of time for students to do that kind of reflection and then make those connections to what the opportunities are, understand how their academic interests and academic experiences and skills, competencies that they're developing lead to that, right? Accrue the necessary kinds of experiences. That stuff is challenging. And I will argue that you're not doing it in 4 years, you're doing it in more like 2 to 3. Because the way that the job market works, and you work in talent acquisition, and a lot of the early talent hiring happens in the fall of senior year for full-time jobs. Fall. So if that's the case, if students need to be ready fall of senior year, then they actually need to be ready by the end of their junior year. So now we've kind of thought about 3 years. Well, in order to get that job, one of the best ways to get that is through internships. So the internship timelines are the same. Beginning of junior year for the summer after internship. So if we're helping students be ready in their junior year, that means they have to have been ready now in their second year. And you know what it takes, right? Been in the talent acquisition space. You can't just show up and interview for a job. You've had to do some research, understand why it is you want to work for this particular company, why this particular role, what value can you add, right? And the last thing you want is for an employer to walk out of your office saying, that's a student who couldn't tell me one reason why I should hire them.
That's the part why having worked in talent acquisition prior, having working now in workforce development, employee training, and having more work now with kind of a more educational focus for staff and opportunities with interns, I always look back when I work in talent acquisition directly at various visits to various campuses, career expos, college students, recent graduates. They are bright, of course. They're ready to take on the world, and I'm great. I'm hardworking. I'm conscientious. All these great words, like you said, without the understanding what exactly makes you qualified. And this is not to say that I don't believe them, but you have to be realistic exactly what makes you marketable. And I see the trajectory, having worked in career services as an undergrad, as a college assistant, and I have noticed that it is maturing into more involved space. I want to go back to a little in the beginning. We talked about, you mentioned artificial intelligence. I have thoughts
Mm.
on that. Yes, I utilize artificial intelligence for various things, even preparing and doing things that I do alone for this podcast project myself. I wouldn't be able to do it alone without artificial intelligence. I can't afford to pay anyone. So I'm really
Yeah.
thankful for that. I've always looked at this word experience from a talent acquisition perspective. There's no substitute for experience, but this means the time that you have worked, the time that you went from theoretical knowledge towards actual practice, doing the hands-on work, you can't replicate that, and that's why experience is highly valued. This is why I look at entry-level candidates who are applying to experienced positions, and I see the gap. How do we kind of shrink that gap? But in terms of artificial intelligence, if I look back on myself as an example, I'm looking back at how it was at 20. So I'm always thinking, if you were giving me artificial intelligence back then, I don't think I would
Mhm.
have utilized it properly to its full potential. I see it as an assistant, but not as someone who can do the job for you. And I think that someone who's
Yeah.
experienced can utilize AI to its fullest potential. Someone
Yeah.
who's not experienced in any profession will not see the potential mistakes that artificial intelligence can present to you. What positive, what benefit is it for college students to utilize AI without experience? Any thoughts on that?
Oh, that's a really great question. I mean, I do think that students need to learn that, right? That it isn't always accurate, that there are some assumptions that are made. I have produced things with ChatGPT with made up articles and references to scholars that don't exist. I think it's getting better, but I knew to check that. I knew to double down. Um, and I don't know that students always know what. I mean, students are getting really incredible critical thinking skills, but there is a gap, right? Because they aren't experts. I mean, it takes a long time to develop expertise and a sense of nuance to understand what is correct and what isn't. But I think the purpose of using AI is also to learn how to prompt AI, how to evaluate the materials that are coming out of AI, how to get it, how to move it from incorrect to correct. Right. So there's a process part of using AI that I think is important. I think what studies are showing is that more middle and upper level jobs are requiring more AI incorporation. I think we're seeing some challenges with the labor market now for early talent, where those roles that tend to be really repetitive, repetitive kinds of work are being now outsourced to I think for a few different reasons, one of which is because it's cheap. Um, and a lot of companies are trying to invest in big AI initiatives and they need the money and they're going to pull it from somewhere. And that seems like a logical way to pull it is to invest in like are there components of this work that we can now automate? Right. So I think that's one reason. And the other reason is that some of our students, this generation of student is struggling with a level of to some degree professionalism challenges, and there's also a values problem. And what I mean by problem is that there's a disconnect between the values of this upcoming generation and the values of the older generations. And I think we periodically we run into these types of things, but this is a population that went through COVID. Um, they saw big economic crises, right? They saw their families lose a lot. And I think their values are more in doing good in the world, more centered in that space, and really understanding the why behind, like, what is the goal of me doing this kind of work? Right? I'm not here to do busy work. I'm here to understand how what I'm doing is contributing to a greater whole. Where some of our older generations, our more experienced generations are like, we work, we've been asked to do something, we go get it done. And so sometimes there's a conflict there. And so some employers are opting out of incorporating this generation in early talent and moving that into AI. Uh, it's it's frustrating.
You mentioned the word value for the second time. What were your values at the time of the age of the current population of students that you have a chance to work with? Like, how do you see that that had changed? Like, I believe human nature is it's not static, it's dynamic. Like, but certain things permeate from generation to generation, like the basic things. So like, I remember myself when I was in college, it was a really that fulfilling experience. I got new kinds of way of thinking about things. I'm an English major, by the way. Communications, I thought I was going to be a journalist. I wanted to change the world, but I think I matured realizing that I need to fit the times, the mold of a quote unquote professional. It's that current generation entering the workforce. They're looking to, it's not about like, what can I do for you? It's like, I expect the employer to mold a little bit towards me as well. For lack of a better term, meet in the middle, but which isn't necessarily so, exemplified by companies moving away from this generation towards AI, thereby creating an even larger gap for entry level positions, possibly.
Absolutely. And I think it's a terrible decision. I mean, um, I think that when we start alienating a population or moving away from a population, and I can understand there are a lot of reasons for this, and I'm probably oversimplifying as I've talked about it, but when we are not incorporating those folks into our pipeline, into middle management, into leadership, where are we going to be in 10 years? Right? Where are those people going to come from? Right. So I think how important it is to, and I realize people change jobs and whatnot, but there is something to be said about bringing that early talent into your organization, learning from that talent, right? Learning about um, this population and their needs, because our companies are often working with many types of needs within the world in which they're serving, right? And so they need to be flexible and adaptable in those ways too. So I think they're like, from a talent perspective, talent development perspective, I think from a like adjusting to the world perspective, um, and meeting the needs of their consumers, I do feel like this is maybe a dangerous space for them to be in. And maybe I'm glad I'm not in that, having be at the table for those decisions. But
So
yeah.
I'd like to dig a little bit deeper. And in order to do so, I like stories. My goal would be for a listener to find something that they can identify themselves with. And I think all of us have stories, and we oftentimes don't talk about uh, our experiences. But what I hope is there would be at least one person that can identify in some point of the continuum of someone's story. So I know that you mentioned you pursued a degree in musicology, PhD in German. Something changed, obviously. So what happened in your life at that moment that you were pursuing, going along one path that you wanted to pursue, but something changed, something happened, obviously, in your life when you decided to walk away?
Um, well, I think maybe I can start by sharing that I loved to learn, and I loved negotiating with kind of ornery challenges. Like, I just loved that. Um, and I had one person in my ear kind of whispering, like, you got to go get a PhD. A PhD is like what success looks like, right? So that was kind of this thing that was kind of in my brain. And I don't know that I realized it until much later. But I'll tell you that as as an elementary, middle, high school student, I just sort of felt like there's a level deeper here in education that I haven't cracked. Like, there's more knowledge, there's more interesting things than this s- superficial stuff that we're learning. that I really wanted to get my hands on. And I just never got there, right? So there was this sort of insatiable thirst for depth of knowledge. And I didn't find it until graduate school. And I felt like I was closer in undergrad. I did a study abroad program in Germany and studied at a German university, and I got closer there. And then I withdrew from my undergraduate degree and stayed in Germany a second year and continued studying there. And then came back, and I don't know, there's this very the education system in Germany and at the in the United States is very different. But when I was in Germany, I just was like, I feel like I'm closer. Like I feel it coming, I feel it closer. You want to keep going. And so that was what really I think perpetuated me to go into graduate school. And when I got to graduate school, I felt like I had arrived. Like, this is what I've been looking for, right? So I did 2 master's degree, 2 PhD programs. My family was like, "You're never gonna like, we need to go rescue you from higher education because uh, this is too much," you know? And of course, my mom was like, I think, really proud, right? At the same time, I had my stepfather who was really questioning all my decisions and whether this was gonna make me successful, and my mother who was, kinda had still held education up as an ideal, right? And, um, and then my father was just championing me the whole time, right? So he was like, whatever you do will be fine. It'll be good." Um, so it
Sounds
was
like, by
sort
the
of
way,
this
there's like a lot of supportive but mixed messages there.
totally mixed messages, a lot of self-doubt, I think. Um, but so I finally got through to my, dissertation. I passed my prelims. Um, I went on to my dissertation and I just sort of struggled. And I struggled with, I think, just the way my program was structured. Most people, when they go to many people have to go through a process where they vet their topic and they get that approved by a committee, and then they go on to do their dissertation. I wasn't. And so here I was. And I think you can kind of draw some parallels to these young students who are thinking about what their career trajectory is. Like, I have to pick some sort of topic that people don't know a whole lot about. And how am I going to know that? And it just sort of felt overwhelming and challenging. And I was still hungry for the information, but I think just sort of spinning in place and not feeling like there was a way out. Um, and I had a great topic. I was studying the taste debate before pre-Kantian taste debate, where people were arguing who has the right to judge a work of art. Who could say that that music was quality or that artwork is quality? Who has the ability to do that? We have since landed on anybody can decide for themselves what works for them. But before then, there was a lot of debate about this. And so I was interested in this topic. Some had been written about it, and I was really trying to extrapolate that to some modern music competitions in Europe, the Euro Music Awards, which was a really kind of interesting idea of universalist um, approach to taste. Right? We can identify one artist for Europe. Anyway, uh, I got pregnant. I had been married. I had got married. I got pregnant. And then I was like, "Oh, how am I going to do? How am I going to do this? How am I going to go to Germany and do the research?" It really just sort of shut down. And I think I realize now I had a lot of misperceptions about what people would perceive of me. I thought people are going to think I'm a failure because I got pregnant. Um, Talk about mixed messages. My dad's calling me to tell me how proud he is that, that I'm going to have a baby and I'm expanding my family and it's a big responsibility. And then I would be hiding and hope I didn't run into any of my professors who would see me pregnant. Like, was kind of, I was just worried and I was kind of caught in this space. And then I had to sort of rethink, like, if I wasn't going to go and study in the archives in Germany, then what was I going to do now for this topic. And so then I was kind of spinning again. The plates are spinning, all the different topics, all the different ideas, not a lot of off ramps. And at some point, I just felt like I was not moving forward. So I decided to leave. Um, and one of the things that was really interesting, I think, was there's a theme that sort of emerged over my lifetime. But my undergraduate degree was in piano performance in German. And when I was in Germany, I spent a lot of time playing the piano, like hours a day. In my second year in Germany, I would spend about 6 to 8 hours every day in the practice room, and I'd have to go home in the middle of the day, eat lunch, and kind of to take a nap because it's really high concentration. And but I hated doing this work alone all the time. Like that was one thing that I learned about myself. I like people. I like working and collaborating with people. And when you're stuck in a practice room for 8 hours by yourself, even if you're highly focused and being productive, it wasn't fulfilling in the ways that I'd wanted it to be. And I don't think that I could have made a career out of it anyway, we'll be honest. I wasn't that good,
But why?
but
Why would you say that?
I just wasn't good enough. I don't think that I would have. I mean, I had made some really wonderful progress and I was a good pianist, but I don't know that I was excellent, right? I wasn't like competition ready. Um, and so, kind of switching to graduate school was my response to that, right? Also, with this desire for more content and thirst for knowledge and whatnot. And then I moved to, here I am then in my dissertation sitting in this library with these really dusty, old, like really dusty, old books written in German, old German type. And I'd have to have like a cheat sheet next to me because it was in this German Fraktur with the old German lettering, the old German print, and I couldn't tell like S's and F's apart. So I have to sit there with my cheat sheet, This is very tedious work. And then I thought, here I am again. I'm like in another practice room for hours by myself. And I just didn't feel like that was where I wanted to be either. And that was part of the impetus for me leaving and realizing that in the moments where I was in collaborative environments, I was just most successful. And so that's when I kind of broke out and I was trying to think about, I first kind of went on maybe I'll start my own music studio. 'Cause I was teaching piano on the side. And then I thought, well, I really don't have the capital for that. Like, I was a poor music student, right? I didn't have the money, as my stepfather reminded me. Um, and so I went back to working at the university and, started then working in academic advising and program management in this interdisciplinary program where we kind of started. And then things kind of took off from there. And that's where really felt like I had my groove. If I had to do it all over again, I think I would. I mean, there's so many components of that experience that were valuable. The level of critical thinking and problem solving that I learned, the types of project management that you had, like if you have to read 500 books a week for one class and be ready to have a discussion about it. And you're like one of 8 people in a class. So you can't get out of not being able to say
Yeah.
something. You have to figure out how to manage your time, right? Learning 30-minute movements of a Beethoven sonata, you have to figure out how to manage that and really productive ways. And so there's just so many skills that I learned from those experiences and the fulfillment was like amazing.
There
Yeah.
is a lot. There's a lot there, like things that I've heard. And by the way,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing all of this. And I think there is, if the aim of this project, of this podcast, is for someone to find themselves in the stories that we share, I think you've certainly done that. But we talked about values. You mentioned values in the beginning. You mentioned the values going through what you had experienced towards graduate schools. And I heard a lot of things, a lot of similarities. Maybe if I feel like if I found it in myself to relate, I'm certain other people did as well. What you've said in the beginning of our conversation, career development is about self-discovery. You mentioned
Yeah.
going through something that you thought you wanted to do, you were pursuing, but then you
Yeah.
realized being there in a room for 8 hours, practicing alone, you want to be connected with people. I think you have to do something to realize that you don't want to pursue this for a lifetime.
Right.
And so
Mhm.
there's experiences that add, oh, I've learned this, I've experienced this, I want to continue doing this, but I think it's uh, the value of doing something, it's this specific thing telling you that you don't want to do this is
Yeah,
also as valuable. Like for myself,
absolutely.
I always think back what could have went differently. Like for myself, I wasn't sure what I wanted to be. I uh, applied to a college, Hunter College, with the intention of going to their physical therapy program, but not because I wanted to, but because my parents had told me, suggested, not having gone through the education system here, they told me, oh, you should do this because you were playing basketball, you hurt yourself, broke your foot, broke your hand, you had to go to PT. Oh, why don't you think about it as a career? That was literally the impetus for the suggestion for me to enroll into school that I did. Afterwards, I enrolled. I realized, oh, my math scores aren't great. I graduated, high school, completed all the math requirements, but math was a big issue for me in school. So I couldn't even get on that track because I knew statistics courses were needed. I couldn't even get past the basics. But I
Yeah.
loved my English 101 class. I aced it. I loved it. But then, but what do I do with it? I was that English major. I love this, but I don't know how to put it into work after graduation. I thought I'm
Yeah.
going to be a journalist, a marketer. Then I got my job that I thought I wanted in marketing, but I ended up lasting there for 4 months, already being a father at that point. It doesn't always go as linear as you hope. And for a lot of us, not just a few of us.
I think for most of us, it's not a linear
Right.
path. And I think it's exactly how you describe it, right? It's that self-evaluation. It's also seizing opportunities when they arise, right? Grabbing onto things you didn't know, I don't know, maybe were even possible, weren't in the plan, right? I think those are the things that compel us to continue to move forward and to improve our own circumstances, whether that's financial or this idea of satisfaction in the work that we do, the types of collaboration and partnerships with people. I think all of that has great meaning.
If we could transition to your work with various schools, what institutional artifacts, things that have been done a certain way for probably decades, that higher education is in the process of transforming?
Oh, what's really great question. So from the career perspective, I would say that I think career services has existed for in one way, shape, or another, probably for 50 years, maybe longer. Um, it used to be the case that you would get a degree and that would all but guarantee you a job. And I think because the threshold to getting that first job has really creeped up. And that I think is a byproduct of seeing uh, s- some outsourcing of training, some higher expectations for people to kind of show up on the job and be able to produce value immediately without really onboarding folks. I think we saw a pattern with previous population of students who didn't stay in their roles for very long. So if I was going to train an employee for 18 months, but they only stayed for 20, I was at a huge financial loss. And so we saw a lot of companies, I think, really kind of adapting with this early talent market. And I think now the expectation has grown a little bit in terms of what we expect students to be able to do, how they should be able to talk about their work, the kinds of experiences that they've had, the understanding about the world that may be more sophisticated than they are, right? So we're seeing this climb now. AI is throwing that into the loop too. Not just can you work with it, but can you work with it in this content area, this expertise area? And so as we think about what that means, universities now are trying to figure out, well, what we were doing isn't the same as what we need to be doing, right? So that's a little bit of the background and the context. What I see as stuff that we've always done, right, is a lot of like career counseling appointments, one-on-one with students, 60-minute appointments. This idea that and some folks are really taking a counseling approach, which I think definitely has value. So I don't want to sound like I'm poo-pooing it. It's just not super scalable. I don't know that it's moving students along in the ways that they want to move along this population. And you're seeing it, I bet, with your 13-year-old. They want things a little bit more personalized, more immediate. Um, so now we're starting to think about, like, well, wait a minute. Well, we can't, this is not sustainable in this mechanism. We need to see more students more frequently. We need to be putting in the structures, the resources, the education to help students onboard into career from the moment they get onto campus, harkening back to thinking about what is that timeline, right? That students need to be ready. Right. So we're kind of getting away from this idea that we help students at the end. We help students in their senior year get jobs. We're pushing that back. Right now, we're having to think about what are the systems that we need to put in place in order to support that early career exploration to set them up for that preparation that they need to be doing. Related, I would say, is the skills articulation. We're moving now to an environment where employers are favoring skills-based hiring over degrees, right? Which in many ways is good. It should open up opportunities for employers to consider candidates they may not have considered before, like maybe an English major, for example, for the skills that you're bringing to the table. Well, where are students going to learn that? Because our faculty don't necessarily think about, they're content experts in their fields, right? And subfields or the subfields. So they don't necessarily talk about their work in terms of skills. They weren't trained that way. They weren't taught that way. But now we're asking them to help students make those connections now. So one of the things that's shifting is instead of talking about skills in a career appointment, like a career advising appointment, we're now trying to push that into the curriculum. So we're seeing a little bit more career integration. So that's another example of things that are changing.
So how is the work that you're doing? What is the work that you're doing specifically inserting yourself into this continuum of higher education change? And what do you see as the rewarding fruits of this labor? What change are you seeing that makes it all worthwhile?
Because the world is changing, like we described, right? The threshold for students to get jobs is changing. We're seeing increased pressure for universities to articulate the return on investment, right? If students are going to spend $80,000 on a degree and take away a bunch of debt, what does that mean for what they're going to get out of it, right? And the value that our legislators have put on this is very financial. So we have new requirements coming down from the state and federal legislators that are putting additional pressure on universities to perform in this space. Okay. So, like, that's really important context, because what's happening is universities are trying to figure out what the right answer is. How do we take what we have and do what we're supposed to do, but what does that look like? And our senior leadership come often from the faculty. And as I mentioned, they may not have been that connected with career. They may not have been in a professional development types of programs. They probably went right from college to graduate school to faculty, right? So they're struggling to put their arms around what is the right strategy. And the career centers are kind of locked in the middle of the organization and trying to push up. But the senior leaders may not be listening or might not create that space for sharing of information. So we see a block. And so what we're seeing are universities thinking, okay, we need to tell our story. We need to get the word out about the return on investment. We need to make the case for families to pay the tuition, rather, to come here. We need to get better career outcomes because there are new regulations around that. So what's the right strategy? And so they come up with some crazy ideas. So, and they're not that they're crazy ideas. It's that they're not actually the ideas that are going to move them forward. And so when I insert myself in there, I had to listen to what is it that we're trying to accomplish. So when we say we want all of our students to have internships, one question I have is that really the goal? Is it really internships, or is it work-based learning experience? Because our students that are headed toward a faculty track don't need an internship. And not that it would be beneficial, but I would say that's not part of the career trajectory we would typically advise. So how do we think about the types of work experiences the students are doing for all the different possibilities of careers that they're going to have the opportunity to pursue. So really thinking about when I insert myself in, it's like, how can you as an institution capitalize on your strengths to really advance students in the right ways?
Just no easy task, by the way. And just you made me think, I'm looking back on my time as a college assistant. There may be about 4 or 5 full-time staff, counselors, directors, internship
Mhm.
coordinator. There were a few college assistants, a few work study students servicing a college, which, remember, if I remember correctly, 10 to 15,000 of undergraduate and graduate students. So you mentioned scalability. I'm thinking now, okay,
Yeah.
I know the numbers of staff didn't really change that much, but the expectation, the ROI, and I'm like just the
Right.
word is wow.
Right. And so then you start to think about what is it going to take to support faculty in integrating skills? What's it going to take to get employers more engaged in the career preparation experiences that students have? What's it going to take to front load this career experience when we still have to think about the transition out, right? What's it going to take to engage our alumni in students' career preparation? Like these are all the things people are trying to figure out and get their arms around. And so my job is to help detangle them and help them think about what's the best use of our resources and time and energy to find the path forward that's going to make the biggest difference for students and for institutions. And it's really interesting. Like sometimes I reflect on this and I think, and I ask myself, am I doing this for the students or am I doing this for higher education? And I go back and forth, right? Like it's so meaningful to me to know that this work over the term will make a difference for students, will advance students from wherever they are at whatever institution that I've had an opportunity to work with, right? That they're going to find their way. And because of something that I was able to create that got them over the hurdle, help them hone and make better decisions, right? Like that is really meaningful to me. But for me, coming back to this sort of passion about like the value of education to me is really, really high. And I spent a lot of time in my youth arguing that the majors and degree programs that I wanted to study had value, if nothing else, for my own personal edification and the love of learning. In some ways, I feel like I am trying to help higher education save itself, save itself from itself to some degree, right? And I see career as a really interesting pathway into this. It's such an important topic. There's a lot of challenges higher education is facing right now. Um, Career isn't going to solve them all by a long shot, right? But it's a space where we can better articulate why the education that we provide matters, how it makes a difference for students, and the world, right? And the world. I mean, we're putting people out into the world, into all kinds of industries, becoming leaders and influencers, and creating, I think, incredible products and research and change out there, and that matters. Like what we do in education and higher education really matters and makes a huge difference in people's lives every day. We don't always connect those dots. And so some of my work is really about how do we help connect those dots? How do we connect those dots so government sees those? How do we connect the dots for students and families? How do we connect those dots for our community so that our even our immediate community, our city, our region understands the value that we're providing? And I feel like that's such an important, in some ways, missing piece for me, right? If you're not at a big flagship institution that has a, you know, Big Ten football team, how are you doing that? Like you gotta, you can't just rely on the brand that is your athletic team. How do we move beyond that and show the value? And so I think that's a real passion space for me.
Right. I'm very glad to hear that. I love these kind of conversations. I think what we're talking about here is like meaning of life kind of stuff.
Yeah, right.
It's yeah, and I look at it, I'm glad we can laugh about it, but um you don't realize the impact that a supportive environment for students, someone who is still in the process of maturing, realizing themselves, and the work that is done around that can change and thus affect the world. Look, I can't help but go back to thinking about the title of your dissertation. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think you said about who is able to judge the work of music. Can you tell me the one more time?
Yeah, it was about taste. Who can have
Taste. There's a
taste?
taste.
Yeah, so
So
the
it's like
taste debate. Mhm.
taste. When you said that, I couldn't help but think connected to parents, kids having different narratives and judging the tastes of the kids is that who
Yeah.
really has the question. I think we can interrelate various things from various walks of life. Art, it's a creation of someone. They're doing it for the sake of doing it. I would hope, I would think, because they feel it's something from within them. They're trying to take it out of themselves to the external. And at the same time, if I were to think, about career services and what we do in school and then in college, we're trying to find that something from within us to put out in the world. We call that a job. Hopefully
Yeah.
we can enjoy it. Hopefully it gives us money, depending on which way you're
Yeah.
motivated, your value. But at the end
Mhm.
of the day, we want to be supported. And I guess, and I do see the value in the work that you're doing. And I know it's still in the process of changing. There's still a lot of work to be done, but I'm glad
Yeah.
there's individuals like you who are part of it, making that change, because it's not just that transactional approach from the work, but I think that you found something within yourself, past experience, your personal examples that we all have. And I think the work that we do, just because of that, if we channel our personal experience, it
Mhm.
becomes, the quality of it is so much better. So, Rebecca, what I loved about our conversation is how your story blurs the line between teaching, working with students, working with institutions, and learning as well, because it looks like you are doing a little bit of both. But before we wrap up, I want to ask you if someone's listening today who feels lost, maybe a college student questioning their major or a professional in the middle of their journey, maybe they're making a pivot, what would you want them to take away from your journey?
Oh, many things, but I think one of the most common misperceptions and myths, which we didn't talk about, is the need for students feel and people feel they have to figure this out for themselves. And that's just not the way it has to be. And the more information and inputs and guidance and advice and mentors who can maybe show you alternate pathways, help you reflect on and hone your own skills and abilities, right? And even reflect back to you where you are talented and skilled, right? Those things can help break through when you're feeling really stuck. And so talk to people, talk to a lot of people, talk to your parents, talk to your friends, talk to your friends' parents, talk to your career advisors, your professors, like get out there and talk with folks because the more the information that you have, the easier it'll be to start to find what resonates with you and help you identify what you feel like is maybe your own purpose and
I,
goal.
I love that, because I think hopefully our conversation right now is part of that. You don't have to do it alone. It's not about just figuring
Yeah.
out by yourself, but it's part of that informational flow that's out there when we put
Mhm.
this out that will help someone. So, Rebecca, if someone wants to connect with your work, where is the best place for our listeners to find you?
Yes. Thank you. I would say I'm very present on LinkedIn, which is, I think, how we maybe got connected. So please feel free to find me on LinkedIn, or you can also go to my website, which is www.pare, P-A-R-E, consulting, one word, .com.
Thank you, Rebecca. I will make sure to put the link to your LinkedIn profile and your website into the show notes. Thank you,
Thank
Rebecca,
you.
again for your honesty, for sharing the stories behind the frameworks, the things that you do, the moments of friction, discovery, growth that makes your work very human. For those listening, if this conversation resonated with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And until next time, keep growing, keep questioning, and as always, continue to push yourself.
Thank you, Artem.